Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen, the participants of the World Investor Week in the Astana International Financial Center. My name is Almaz Jolamanov, and I will be moderating this panel session on sustainable finance. I'd like to do some technical announcements. You may ask your questions through the chat or Q&A function in the navigation panel of Zoom. We will collect all your questions and respond to them in the end of the panel session. You may also enjoy the simultaneous translation into English, Russian, and Kazakh. That is available for participants registered through Zoom. With this, it is my pleasure to introduce the four speakers of today's panel session. So the first speaker is Ishaq Burney. Ishaq Burney is the Managing Director and Chief Legal Officer of the Astana Financial Services Authority. His over 2 decades of experience spans disputes, corporate and regulatory law in Australia and Middle East across all facets of corporate and financial services transactions and regulation. Ishaq was at the Qatar Financial Center for over a decade, where he held various senior roles, including the General Counsel role. He also held various senior positions within the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, within the Australian government, where he was involved in several high-profile financial markets enforcement and takeover matters. Ishaq has worked for an energy conglomerate and General Electric in Australia. Our second speaker is Aigul Kussaliyeva, who is the Chief Strategy Officer of AIFC's Green Finance Center. Prior to her appointment, she has spent 4 years with AFC Authority. Previously, she worked at the National Statistics Office, being responsible for implementation of the Systems of National Accounts 2008 in terms of financial account. In her earlier career, Aigul used to work for the Trade Committee of the Ministry of Economy and Budget Planning of Kazakhstan and the Republic Association of Debaters. Recent projects of Aigul include participation in the development of the green bond rules of the Astana International Exchange and co-development of the green taxonomy of Kazakhstan, the so-called classification of green projects in Kazakhstan. Our third speaker is Viktor Kovalenko. Viktor is a Director of Climate Change and Sustainability Services for Central Asia, Caucasus, Ukraine, and Belarus at the Ernst & Young. Mr. Kovalenko is one of the pioneers of building the climate change and sustainability services practice in the region. Viktor is working on the integration of CIS and European teams working on climate change and sustainability services, while working with companies from mining, oil and gas, energy and technology sectors. He's helping them in evaluation and communication of impacts of their investments, operations and projects on economy, society and environment, building their reputation by better corporate reports, reducing costs and anxiety by building more effective stakeholder relationships. In total, Viktor has 16 years of experience in promotion of B2B services and development of new businesses in large corporations in such countries as Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Russia, Georgia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. And our last but not least speaker is Bilegsaikhan, Bella, who is currently working as a project and partnership manager at Mongolian Sustainable Finance Association, focusing on green finance, green microfinance, clean air, and environment and social risk assessments for non-banking financial organizations. She previously worked for the Ernst & Young as a senior auditor. During her professional services to major banks and international companies in Mongolia and overseas, she observed that Bella observed that during her career that environmental and social risks reporting and its assessment is crucial to reach climate change objectives, and thus working towards to become an expert in this field. So as you can see, we have a quite diverse and balanced panel of speakers from diverse background, regulator, non-profit, consultancy, and industry. So how significant is the trend of sustainable finance at global scale? Where do AIFC and Kazakhstan stand on the global agenda of sustainable finance? How do we compare regionally? will ESG be a game changer? So let us elaborate on this during the panel. And I'd like to give the floor to our first speaker, Mr. Ishaq Burney. Ishaq, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Almas, and for your kind introduction of myself and also fellow panelists. Now, the first, the task that, Almas has parted on to me is to set the tone in terms of sustainable finance, give you an appreciation of what sustainable finance is about, and also perhaps take an appreciation as to why this topic is important to us, both from a humanity perspective, but also from a very importantly investment perspective. Because at the end of the day, investment has to make sense. It has to have tangible returns for people in terms of not just the ability to actually feel good about it. And in making investments, you feel good about it as well. Well, that's excellent. Now, when we start talking about sustainable finance, often the first immediate response that people, mentally derive from the concept of sustainable finance, he must be talking about something that is a bit green or climate related. Well, that is correct. But at the same time, the concept of sustainable finance is a lot broader. It talks about sustainability. It talks about the environment, of course. It talks about social factors. It talks about your responsibilities to the broader stakeholder. And it talks about issues such as diversity in organizational management as well. So the concept I wanted you to appreciate is a lot broader than just talking about green or climate-related matters. Now, often when people start talking about sustainable finance, the story evolves as such that people have an immediate response. Well, the developed nations of the world have polluted for centuries and derived economic gain from that. Is it not the time of the rest of the world to be able to do the same and also make profit and investment from such activities? Well, that is essentially the core proposition that sustainable finance is trying to reverse. That the story is a lot broader than that from both an investment perspective. For example, a firm which is operating and is unable to comply with its obligations in terms of broader responsibilities to society may have its license to operate in the society taken away from it. So you may collapse on the basis of an environmental disaster. And perhaps if that had been rewarded appropriately during the organization's life cycle, then and in the way that it raised finance and was rewarded in its investments, then they were rightly incentivized to actually follow that in their management objectives. People often take you back to 2006 when Al Gore's movie, The Inconvenient Truth, came out. I must admit that for me, even being in the finance profession, that was one of the first times that I sort of started paying attention to this concept. That's while I'm not advocating anybody's movie making skills, that's certainly something that most of us should at least try to see once in their life to get an appreciation for the broader issues that are being raised there. Now, finance is very much related to corporate governance as well. So one sort of evolution in the process of evolution of sustainable finance that I'd wanted to get people to appreciate is that corporate governance became linked to sustainable finance. And how this happened is that essentially we used to talk about something called shareholder theory. I'm a company, I'm here to make profit for my shareholder. Well, the rest of the world realized that often that in itself is not enough, because you might make a bit of profit in a short term, but eventually the organization fails, people get prosecuted, and there's a corporate disaster, and it causes concerns for investors, it causes concerns for employees, it causes concerns for the broader society. And to address that, the notion of inclusive stakeholder approach got developed. Now, the inclusive stakeholder says that when I am managing a company as a director, I need to look at the concept from a lot broader than who is my shareholder. So yes, profit making is very much essential to it, but also sustainability of that profit making is very important to it as well. And the other sort of hero that I wanted to mention in the evolution of sustainable finance that came along the way, which not a lot of people appreciate, is a guy called Mervyn King, who defined much of this side of corporate governance from South Africa. And that is quite interesting that a country like generally you find that, you would expect England, America, and other people to take the lead in, much of this topic debate. However, it is actually South Africa which often advocated for these things. And eventually the things that they were advocating years before became part of the broader corporate governance theory of the rest of the world. So with that appreciation, there is something called the UN 2030 agenda, which talks about sustainable development goals and the Paris climate agreement as well, which is another important thing to appreciate. And what is this area designed to do? It is designed to support economic growth while reducing economic pressures on the organization. And in that sense, you have to look at the environmental pressures, you have to look at social considerations, and you have to look at the broader governance considerations. And what are you trying to achieve? Well, some outcomes for the long-term economic growth of the organization, a stronger investment environment that is advocated by the firm, low carbon and green circular economy, and enhanced climate-related risk management. Now, if I just take you to the next slide to explain some sort of global overview on what is happening in this industry, is that a lot of people disregard the debate, including recent American presidents who may not believe in climate change. Okay, fine. But fundamentally, from an investment perspective, what does this mean for people? So just to evoke the interest of the person who's after the profitability and the investment, the ESG assets in the world are going to hit 53 trillion by 2025. That's a third of the assets under management pretty much around. And we have something called exchange traded funds, which are funds which actually pick certain companies. Those exchange traded funds pick companies which are basically suiting their ESG criteria and therefore promoting the good social sustainability goals which are important to them as well. Now that is a 135 billion story. Then we talk about the debt market, which is when I raise my funding from the market, and of course that comes with a return, a coupon, yield, all the usual things that we look for in investment. Well, that market's about 2.2 trillion currently. So, from finance, money, numbers game, it's a big story. In terms of what us regulators are doing. So in terms of, the story as it goes back in the day when initially a lot of these investments came, you had to act to promote people to take up, cause of good protection for investors. It wasn't just automatic. If you don't advocate it, it doesn't become part of the firm's criteria. So similarly, regulators globally are taking up the concept that sustainability is very much part of the regulations, which they have to drive onto the firms as well. So in this regard, some of my colleagues will talk about some of the things that the AIFC is doing in this space, but the International Capital Markets Association has some standards on it. There's Green Bond Standards Release Association. Then there is ESG loan principles, and central banks and regulators are now prioritizing this as part of their regulatory agenda for the year. And also from an exchange perspective, things that are required on a disclosure. So if I'm a company, I'm listed on the stock market, I have some mandatory continuous obligations to disclose to people. Now, ESG is very much becoming a part of that criteria as well. And in a country like Kazakhstan, where there is a high carbon footprint, my colleagues from the Green Finance Center will tell you how important and how big the opportunity is in that space. Now, moving on to the next slide. The AIFC is playing a very key role in this space. Kazakhstan has ratified the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015. We have commitments to become a carbon neutral country by 2060. And we're committed to reduce 15% of emissions by 2030. In terms of the AIFC, we are a smart, responsive, and a standard that aspires to international best practice standards. And in that sense, we think that we have a role to play in terms of driving some of these standards globally for the adoption of not just people in Kazakhstan, but people who might see value in cooperating with us within the Eurasian region and broadly within the world. So those are the matters that I just wanted to lay out for you initially, from the point of view of giving you a greater appreciation of what this sustainable finance debate is about. And now I will leave it to my fellow presenters to take you through some of the individual topics, and then look forward to answering some of your questions and engaging in a panel debate afterwards as well. Thank you very much. Over to you, Almas.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ishaq. Very interesting global overview and international perspective of sustainable finance as a tone setting for the discussion. Issac mentioned that AFC's role in advancing ESG standards in Central Asia, ESG requirements for AFC business community, and mentioned also legislative plans. Aigul, could you please share insights from AFC and Kazakhstan and reflect to what extent sustainable finance agenda is prioritized in the AFC? So over to you, Aigul.
Thank you, Almas. Thank you, Issac. And good morning and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for joining the session today. And I thank AFSA for having me here today. And let me share my screen. Okay, so I'll be talking today about green finance policies in Kazakhstan, what AIFC is doing in this space, and why it matters. Usually when we talk about climate change and its impact on the people, average, like regular people, never sees or never relates those issues with their own lives. But if you look at those, like regular grocery shoppings you do every day, certain fruits, like let's say apples, their price might get more expensive than yesterday. And there are, of course, many reasons for that. But one of them might be climate change which you might not consider actually. In fact, due to droughts, maybe, the suppliers of apples may spend more resources to grow that apple for you. And of course, they include it in the final price of the apple, which comes to your table. And when we talk about the insurance companies, for instance, the representatives of the financial sector, which pays those losses for agriculture sector, they also might think about the climate risks, actually, their effect on the business. And if they take into account those risks, they mitigate them and manage them appropriately. And when we talk about the floodings, which are a result of really bad weather conditions lately, in many places around the world, it also encourages municipalities or any other entities in the coastal areas actually to make more investment in the resilient infrastructure. And of course, it's all about the carbon emissions, which affect the health of many people around the world, and it affects the healthcare system, which is more kind of under the pressure to provide the services to this group of people. What I'm trying to get to here is that all these things in total brings us extra expense, which needs to be spent to adapt and mitigate the climate change effect. And even during this pandemic, we did experience the situation when the healthcare system actually couldn't provide the certain services to the public because of the overwhelming number of people having the issues with COVID, right? Therefore, we need to understand that the system should be kind of changed, and we need to move all together to get to that point when we reach the net zero target. And when we talk about this negative impact, we need to understand that we have to sort of assess these risks and manage them. And it might require extra investment, but then it will help us to sustain our economy. And when we talk about the corporates, for instance, there are 3 ways for them actually to manage this. The first thing is they just can stay where they are. It's all about those companies which already have that net zero target implemented, and which, there are some companies which carbon footprint is already net zero. So those companies don't need to do anything, right? And there are other ways for companies to take approach in this situation. They can see new business opportunities, and they might, implement new products. And there are other ways as well. For instance, some corporates can actually fully change their business model. If you remember the Danish oil and natural gas company 10 years ago, and now it's one of the biggest, largest wind energy producers in the world. So it's one of those great examples out there for corporates to consider and maybe to follow. And when we talk about the government in this perspective, it's very important for the governments to kind of show the way to the corporates and other members of the society to follow. And it's important to have the guidelines and the policies in place. For instance, on this slide, you can see the certain documents which were introduced by our government many years ago. One of them is, what's that called? The concept of transition to a green economy. And you can see the give me a second. You can see the main sectors of economy which were considered to be the main ones, and where the opportunity for reducing the carbon emissions are high. So, in fact, this actually helps the corporates and actually other members of society to understand where we have this opportunity and where we can work. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, all this requires investment. On this slide, you can see the different numbers, and they come from the concept of transition I mentioned earlier. And there is another document developed by the government, which is being circulated among the government entities now. It's a strategy of low carbon development of Kazakhstan. And you can see, for instance, if you look at the concept, it says that during the 2014 to 2050, we will need around $3-4 billion per year to implement the program. And if you look at the other numbers here, you can see that, for instance, from 2021 to 2060, we'll need more than $600 billion extra investment to reach the carbon neutrality by 2060. So there are different numbers out there, but we do understand that it's a huge amount of money which needs to be invested. And what we're doing here at the AIFC Green Finance Center is working on green finance policies for Kazakhstan to support the government, support the corporates which try to make that transition. And we're also starting to work in the region to support the Central Asian states. And when we talk about green finance policies, we always rely on these four elements of it. And I just want to go briefly through this, maybe in the interest of time. So the first thing, taxonomy, which was already mentioned by Almas and other speakers, it's quite important because, we need to avoid greenwashing, and we need to understand what is green and what is not. There are many international standards which give us, overall guidelines like CBI or Green Bond principles. But at the same time, we do need to have these thresholds or criteria which is relevant to our economy. Therefore, in our taxonomy, you can see these criteria you need to meet in order to call your project green. And another important point is its incentives. So as I mentioned earlier, we do need investment, but it should be coming from public and private sector as well. But then we need to help the private sector, to get there. And for that purpose, many emerging economies in the world use the subsidy scheme. And we also follow that path. And if you may know, we talked about this a lot. And it was actually also discussed yesterday at one of our webinars. If you may know, AIFC Green Finance Center usually organize a lot of webinars on this topic. And I hope that you were part of one of these yesterday. So going back to the subsidy scheme, we're working with the Damu Fund and the Ministry of National Economy to introduce this subsidy scheme to cover the expenses like interest rates of green credits and green bonds. And we expect actually that during the 5 years of this roadmap business program operated by Damu, the green project holders will get up to 50% coverage of their interest rates. And when we talk about this sort of subsidy scheme, there are other ways actually to approach those, incentive measures, for the public sector or private sector. For instance, tax. You can use the tax system or other things. And even going through like personal example, just recently I was thinking about buying an EV car and considering to have it here in Astana, right? And when I was actually, it comes to mind that there are not many charging stations around here to, to manage my car. And actually those which are existing here, they do not provide this charging in, it takes like more than 4 hours to get that full charge. So what I'm trying to get to, the government should think about that and kind of provide the, incentive system, not only to, regular people, but also for business who wants to enter this part of the market, right? And here you can see the slides about the products which are in existence in green finance market, and you can see the way you can issue the green bonds at our exchange, and you see the examples of different bonds which were issued up to date in Kazakhstan. And I'm really happy to say that we've got, I think, 6 bonds, sustainable bonds issued in Kazakhstan, and there are green social bonds. And just recently, our center actually helped to bring to the market the first green loan. And there are different products out there, and if you may know, there is a new product which is called sustainability-linked bond, which was introduced in 2019. And what's interesting that at that time, or in 2020, there were like 6 or 9 issuances per year worldwide. But this year, we already have more than 100 SLBs issued in the world. So it's quite interesting product, and it's interesting both to buy and sell side. And I want to hope that we'll have SLBs in Kazakhstan as well. And another point here I wanted to just touch upon is a disclosure. So I think we're running out of time, and I will just maybe say here that it's very important to measure what you're trying to reach. Without that, you cannot assess where you're standing and what's your progress. And when we say that, it's not only about green finance, it's all about, it's about everything you do. Therefore, we do believe that it's important to see the, carbon footprint of corporates. It's important to see the financial flows we are, moving towards net zero, and see if, we are doing enough or not. So I guess Victor will be talking about the ESG disclosure we are trying to introduce at our stock exchange. And I just want to also mention here importance of green loans. AFC has been working on development of green capital markets since 2017, and we do have some progress in Kazakhstan, right? But at the same time, we understand that credit market actually takes a lot of space, both in Kazakhstan and in the region of Central Asia, and it's something we need to work on. And maybe going back to the subsidy scheme, I would just mention here that the subsidy scheme we're working on now is, targeting small and medium enterprises. But when you think about the green projects, some of them might require much more funding. And therefore, I do believe that the government need to take steps, to introduce a certain, separate program for the more large projects. So I think I will just leave it here. Thank you, Almas. Over to you.
Thank you, Aigul. It's quite impressive, actually, to learn, the progress that is being implemented in AFC, and various initiatives and products such as Green Bonds Initiative. One of the key messages that IOSCO disseminates regarding the sustainable finance is that a smart investor actually understands that sustainable finance comes in different manifestations in different ways. So it can be environmental, social, and governance investing. It can be impact investing. It can be social investing. And this is something that to understand when it comes to sustainable finance. Victor, Ernst & Young, is quite a thought leader in terms of ESG matters. It helps firms to understand their impact. In the impact of their activities and projects on sustainability agenda. Would you like to elaborate on current state and future of ESG reporting? Over to you, Victor.
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Almas. Good day, good afternoon, good morning to distinctive participants. Should I share my slide by myself, or they will be shared by organizers?
For you.
Okay, I will do. Well, what I wanted to talk about, colleagues, some words about the future of ESG reporting standards and how it can influence the capital markets and the topics we are discussing today. So the key point which I would like to raise here is, again, why we talk so much about ESG, and then in my presentation, why we will be talking about the reporting standards. For me and for us, working with these aspects, ESG is not a kind of revolution or something like reinventing of America. Well, this is the prism, this is the glass under which capital markets see the risk exposure of investors or companies where they can invest money either through capital or bond or any other debt or any other approach. So this is a kind of what is the exposure of this investee to risks other than financial ones in area of environmental stuff, social, people, both circles, internal and external in area of social. Whether the company is being governed properly and there are any risks there in terms of improper corporate governance. So why do investors care about that? Because the logic is very simple. If the company's exposure to these non-financial risks is high, then it is a high probability that the credit readiness of this in a company or being able to repay investments to the investors will be under scrutiny. That's why I, as investor or as bank or any other supplier of capital, should care about exposure of this company to these ESG risks. So here we come to reporting, because reporting is one of the key sources to understand the company's exposure to risks. Of course, there are other instruments like ESG ratings, specialized ratings by special rating agencies. There are different assessments of various boutique firms, of investors, suppliers of information like Bloomberg, right, like Refinitiv, etc., etc. But anyway, the reporting which company prepares to explain its exposure to ESG risks and how the company works with these risks, how it establishes proper remediation of these risks. This is the key source for capital markets, for investors and other stakeholders about this information. So this is why we talk about this. And I would like to talk a bit about the current stage and future endeavors in this area. So saying about state of play, there is a key message which we receive every day, every week from investors and capital markets, that there is a disconnect between the importance of ESG, between the reporting which companies prepares, and between the plenty of standards or guidelines which can be applied by companies to disclose their ESG-related information. And again, there are standards, there are guidelines, there are guidelines of stock exchanges, various government set guidelines and frameworks, etc. And the key message from international capital markets is that the world should come to kind of comprehensive, consolidated standard like IFRS or something like that. Again, the important message is that in the current world, many stakeholders, especially investors, have taken climate-first approach to ESG standards. So this means that they are putting exposure of the company to climate risks as one of the key important sources of information for them to make proper investment decisions. And this means both types of climate-related risks, so the transitional and physical. In many cases, especially in our part of the world, when company hear something about climate change or climate risk, they think about physical risk. So nature disasters in nature, climate change, heating of air, etc., etc. This is important, but there are other types of climate-related risks which are named transitional. And this is related to energy transition the world is going through now. And what is going on now in China in Europe connected with energy crisis, this is exactly the influence of these energy transition risks. And it is very important to understand how the company exposure is connected to these risks, and reporting can explain that. The pressures is to produce not only high quality sustainability reporting, but also, again, as I said, to use some kind of single or at least consolidated standard in the means of single language, because this allows investors and stakeholders to compare different companies, their performance in area of ESG from around the world, from various sectors of economy and various countries. Now it can create some problems for the companies. And the ecosystems and source of pressures for this stuff, we divided it into three areas. So politics and policy, society and business. You see the groups which we put here, and any of these groups would like to have a kind of simple and single language to compare performance of in area of ESG for the companies. And again, there is GRI standard. There is also the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD framework, which will probably serve as a reference for the IFRS climate first approach. What is going on now is that, well, this is the most promising development, that IFRS, the International Financial Reporting Standards Foundation, they have, we expect that they will launch the International Sustainability Standards Board in November in Glasgow in COP26. And the aim of that board will be to create something similar to IFRS in area of ESG, and also to include some ESG related standards into the IFRS. So this means that after these activities, the world probably will get a kind of, well, similar to IFRS single standard for accounting and reporting on ESG aspects to any countries in the world. And well, this is the message from the G7 finance ministers and central bank governance from their communique on strong support of this IFRS process. So they support this creation of single standard. Here we presented just a couple of certain jurisdictions and what they have in moving to mandatory and voluntary sustainability reporting. So EU, European Union, has its own plans on corporate sustainability reporting directive. US, UK, Canada, some other countries like China, for example. As I said at the beginning, some countries have their own comprehensive reporting frameworks, or the stock exchanges of these countries have their own. Well, as it has been said in the beginning, AFSC and the AIX and Astana International Stock Exchange is also going now to develop and implement its own ESG reporting guidelines. And the aim is not to reinvent another ESG reporting framework or guideline. The point is to develop a kind of principles-based document and what should be disclosed, and refer to existing standards answering the question how this should be disclosed. Just one important topic which I wanted to raise here, because time is closing now, is that in any standard, in any framework, in any guideline, it is very important to refer to a concept of materiality. So not to disclose everything which the company wants to disclose, but to disclose those ESG aspects which are material for the company's influence and impact on society and wider stakeholders, and at the same time, what is important, what is material for these stakeholders in terms of companies' exposure to ESG risks. And here I'm going to finish. Here are key dates which I would propose to watch in next 12 to 18 months. There will be a lot of announcements in area of consolidation of ESG reporting frameworks and guidelines, etc. So just couple of recommendations finally, what companies could do in this area. So first, don't wait for sustainability reporting to be mandated. It is very important for companies to go into this journey, to already start prepare the data and report on it. Second, put ESG and sustainability reporting on the board's agenda. Include it into strategy and enterprise risk management of the company. Because as I said, ESG is the lens under which capital markets understands the exposure of the company to risks. Third, seek assurance to build trust in sustainability reporting. It is well connected to the same which is being done in area of financial reporting. External independent assurance builds trust in what is reporting. And finally, this reporting should be integrated with finance function. So this is the baby, if I can say so, of CFOs and financial controllers finally, because exposure to ESG risks means exposure to financial problems. And companies can contribute to standard setting process. Any organization which is working under any guideline in area of ESG reporting has a kind of consultations process, getting feedbacks, etc. Companies can contribute there and work on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. That was quite wonderful. It seems that the sustainable finance agenda is gaining momentum internationally, globally, with all these developments and enactments, coming into force soon. And I think that sort of, reinforces what Issac earlier said in terms of, the size of the, sustainable finance market globally. I think these are quite sort of convincing trends and strong messages to send to the corporate world. I think one country stands out in terms of advancing the sustainability agenda in our region, and that is Mongolia. And let us now look into Mongolia's experience in sustainable finance. Bella, the floor is yours.
Hello, thank you, Almas, for inviting me, and I'm very honored to speak at this event with this very experienced and the industry experts. And so I'm going to talk about how Mongolia is progressing towards sustainable finance. And firstly, I would like to talk about how the climate change is affecting Mongolia. So for the last 70 years, the average temperature of Mongolia increased by 2.1 Celsius, while the global average is 0.1. So it's like 2 times more than the global average. So because of the climate change, almost 70% of the land is degraded, and desertification is the major issue in Mongolia. So as you might have heard that this year, Mongolia and China experienced the major sandstorm in a decade. So the desert region of Mongolia and China's sandstorm goes up to Korea, and it is commonly known as yellow sand dust. And to mitigate this desertification issue, the president of Mongolia recently announced to plant 1 billion trees by 2030. Moving on, I would like to also talk about how the private sector, especially the banking sector, moving towards the sustainability issue and green financing. So in 2013, all the commercial banks of Mongolia united under the 8 principles of sustainable finance. And in 2015, the risk management framework developed, and the banks has started evaluating the E&E risks of the borrowers. So the 8 principles asks the banks to reduce the E&E risk of the loan and financing the green projects and support the green economy, and also the banks asks their borrowers to be transparent, and also the eight principles asks the banks to be transparent and lead by their own example. And because the sustainable finance is not only about the banking sector, in 2017, the Mongolian Sustainable Finance Association became a separate entity, and we are now the membership-based non-government organization that focuses on 6 strategic areas, and one of them is sustainable finance. And in terms of sustainable finance in the banking sector, the member banks reports the voluntary report to us about their sustainable finance principles, and the collective team of Bank of Mongolia and Mongolian Sustainable Finance Association and AIFC goes to the bank and evaluates their performance report. So as of the performance rating of 2020, almost 60% of the Mongolian commercial banks rated B and above, and moreover, the Sustainable Banking Network assesses its member countries' efforts towards sustainable finance, and we are on the advancing stage as per the report in 2019. So moving on, another milestone for our efforts to sustainable finance is that in 2019, we have approved the National Green Taxonomy, and it has been approved by the Central Bank of Mongolia Financial Stability Board. And the taxonomy includes the 6 areas and 6 categories. And what was the most important thing about approving the Mongolian Green Taxonomy was that the Central Bank of Mongolia started collecting the green loan statistic information from the commercial bank, which is based on the Green Taxonomy. And as of 2020, the 3% of total green loan portfolio was dedicated to the green activities. And from out of that, the 20% were dedicated to sustainable agriculture and land use and forestry. And we are extending our operation into developing the SDG finance taxonomy. So it's under progress, and we also expect this to be approved by the Bank of Mongolia and to be useful in the future. And another milestone of our progress towards sustainable finance was that starting from last year, we went beyond banking industry, and we have expanded our membership into non-banking financial institutions, asset management companies, and also business sectors. And also, there are several projects underway on the greening the capital market, the last milestone that we would like to highlight is that the Mongolian Green Finance Corporation project has approved by Green Climate Fund in 2020. So the one thing highlighted about the Mongolian Green Finance Corporation, in short MGFC, is that this is the corporation with a very unique corporate structure. It has an international GCF's funding, equity funding, and also the government of Mongolia is dedicated to also, include their funding, and private sectors such as banks and asset management companies are also putting equity investments. And the purpose of the MGFC is to finance the green projects through the banks and other NBFIs. So if the project start, we expect the MGFC to be started from next year, and so the direct and indirect benefits would be huge, such as the The energy efficient houses will be built in the Gert district, which is the most polluted area of the city, and the 24,000 houses in Gert districts will be insulated, and also the 130 companies will be taking energy efficient measures, and collectively we expect that more than 2,000 new green jobs will be created after this project. Thanks. And so moving forward, we, the Sustainable Finance Association, vision is to become a regional knowledge and research center in sustainable finance and green finance. And we planned the several activities towards implementing, so we are working towards to be the regional knowledge center in our region for the future. So thank you for your attention, and happy to take any questions about my presentation.
Bella, thank you very much. I think that was quite a holistic discussion within a short amount of time. I think we have 6 minutes for Q&A session still. So I'd suggest that we proceed with the Q&A session. I remind our viewers that you can ask your questions through the chat or Q&A button on your navigation panel in Zoom. So with that, maybe I'll just proceed with the first question to Ishaq. Ishaq, does sustainability finance suffer from a presumption that is just a feel-good investment?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting one, Almas, because I guess the story is no different from if those of us who are brave enough to actually admit they were in the workforce at the time where global financial crises happened or where Enron collapsed, it essentially starts with driving the standards, but it then becomes very much a part of the narrative of, if I want to invest in this company, then I will only invest in this company if it has good corporate governance, financial reporting, and then this story will become sustainable reporting. So in the sense that currently, we all say that, you'll sleep better perhaps if you invest in companies which are greener, etc. It's a bit more than that, because not very, very far into the future, it'll be more expensive for companies to raise finance that don't comply with these standards. Companies that don't comply with these standards will have actions taken against them, therefore reducing their value. So I think purely from a point of view of making an investment that actually continues to generate a return, this will become an essential criteria, just like we look at companies' financial reports at the moment in assessing whether they're a good company or a bad company to invest in.
Yeah, thank you, Ishaq. The next question I'd like to address to Aigul. Aigul, we know that there is a progress in development of green capital markets in Kazakhstan. How about green credits? Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I just touched upon that during my intervention earlier. But basically, yeah, I would say that AIFC has been working on green bond space for quite a while now, but then we do believe that the regulators in Kazakhstan should kind of catch up and work on the green credits as well, because it's a huge amount of money out there which is available for green projects, and we do need to understand and kind of track those flows to see if they are going to the in the right direction. And we actually proposed the central bank and the regulator, the agency, to have this sustainable finance project together, and we were seeking actually support from Green Climate Fund to support this project, to fund it, and have these green credit reporting system in place, and also to introduce this environmental risk management system in the second-tier banks. And it's also important to keep in mind that the taxonomy we have currently is applicable for the bond space, and it's more easier for projects. But when we talk about banks and the credit systems, the systems of the second-tier banks are quite different, and there should be some understanding how can we approach this to support the bank, on the reporting. And more than that, before like getting to the reporting, we need to kind of, we need to provide more funding for green projects. So as I mentioned earlier, we do have this program for small and medium enterprises, but we do need to provide more funding so we can see, the much more impact than now.
Aigul, thank you. I have maybe the last question, and I'll address that to Victor. Before, maybe I give 1 minute time slot for each speaker to make a wrap up and maybe highlight takeaways from the discussion. So Victor, the question goes, what are the 3 drivers for ESG reporting further development?
Well, I would tell about the following. First, I have already mentioned during my presentation, this is that in current turbulent times, exposure to ESG risks became the same important as exposure for financial risks. So problems, issues which the company may face in area of environmental performance, environmental safety, and in social area like strikes or something else, can even stop the business or the enterprise, or at least create significant problems with high financial impact. That's why capital markets, investors, and of course other stakeholders began placing so much importance to exposure to ESG risks. And as I said, ESG reporting is the key source of information on how the company is working in area of ESG risks, what are those to which it is exposed, and what is the strategy to mitigate them. Second, it probably is the global green and climate change agenda, which is demanding and which is growing. So again, it places companies and businesses under scrutiny and under understanding that climate risks are important. They can really influence the financial performance of the company. So again, everything here is about money. It is very important for the company to be a good corporate citizen, to be the company and the organization which takes care about environment, etc. But finally, it's all about money, about the financial problems, financial imperformance due to exposure to ESG risks. And reporting is essential here.
Thank you, Victor. May I now suggest that we wrap up the panel session, and I'd like to ask every speaker to take 1 minute time slot, maybe to highlight what would you like every investor, including retail investor, to take away from this discussion. Ishaq, can we start with you?
Sure, Almas. So the point that I wanted to make is that I think from a retail investor perspective, you just need to make sure that you invest in companies which continue to generate returns. So sustainability of the return. And those companies will only be the ones that actually have ESG policies in place, are actually reporting, are actually investing in making sure that they continue to give returns in matters. It will also mean that certain companies which comply with these standards, just like when you look at a company and say, oh, look, is this company actually got good financial reports? Can I trust the reports that they're actually producing? Same way, think that if a company is not reporting in this standard, they're not, illustrating to the people that, their disclosure is up to mark, then should I be investing in that company in any event? So it's more about how long can I retain the returns from my entity as well. And just in passing, if you actually do some searches on what are the returns of some of these companies, actually they're really, really good returns, in investing in green products. So it's not just about the fact that I don't actually, I'm investing in the longevity. Actually, the absolute returns that I'm taking away from certain of these projects are actually also the good companies that I should be investing in anyway.
Aigul, would you like to continue?
Yeah, maybe I would just add here a couple of sentences that sometimes corporates and investors or asset management, they are looking for some signs in the market. So thinking that once this starts moving, we will get in. And for those who are really looking for such signs, I just want to highlight here that regulators, financial regulators, already are recognizing the climate risks. And if we talk about European Central Bank, for instance, I think this year or last year, they already announced that they consider climate risk as systemic risk. So therefore, we just need to understand how to, kind of manage those risks and, move our finance in the right direction. So just kind of reminder maybe to get.
Aigul, thank you. Victor, please.
Well, to be honest, I have already made wrap up answering the question which received from you, because that is really the things which are important for companies to do here. I can only repeat a couple of the statements which I made in the end of my presentation, that for the companies, it is a suggestion not to wait until the reporting will be mandated everywhere. So it is good practice, good approach to start its journey in the area of ESG reporting, because first, it helps to become more transparent for external stakeholders. This is exactly based on our practical experience. When companies starting to report on ESG matters, it enters into the area which was hidden before for this company. It explores new indicators and new types of information about which the company probably didn't take care before. And this is when it is first time the company tries to understand how to disclose. This is connected with the what is the source of this information. Well, the next step in this chain is, okay, what we are doing to prepare to create this information. And finally, it may come to the serious understanding of, well, we should change something in a way how we make our decisions and how we make our business. So don't wait for this reporting being mandated. Seek for external assurance, because trust is essential in this area, and try to put this area as not an external separate function, but bring it into agenda of CFO.
Really good points. Thank you, Victor. And last but not least, Bella, hand over to you.
Yeah, so I think there are two hottest topic currently in the world is the first, of course, the information technology, including the big data, AI, etc. And the secondly, the sustainability and green development topic. So I would like to say to the investors that the company that do not practice the circular economy and the company do not assess its environmental and social risks, we cannot be sure about if the company would be existing in the future. So looking at the ESG and sustainability report of the company is the crucial first step of the if you want to invest in a certain company. So this would be the wrap up from my end. Yeah. Thank you.
Bella, thank you very much. I think that completes our panel session on sustainable finance as the future of financial world. I'd like to thank all the speakers for their brilliant contributions. Dear participants of the World Investor Week, thank you very much for your interest and participation during the whole week. This event concludes our Investor Day conference, the last event of the World Investor Week. And I am now honored to hand over to Mr. Mukhtar Bubeyev, Chief Executive Officer of Astana Financial Services Authority, for his concluding remarks. Mr. Bubeyev, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Almas. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the 2021 World Investor Week in the AFC comes to an end. Thank you for your interest and participation in the World Investor Week. We held 17 online and offline events under the central theme of promoting investment intelligence and dedicated to understanding investment opportunities, risks, investing smart, and innovations. We have also covered the issues of digital finance, sustainable finance, fraud and scams prevention, Islamic finance, and financial literacy and education. Throughout the events, we have emphasized the key messages of the International Organization of Securities Commissions, which are the basis for financial literacy, such as never disclose personal information on an unexpected call, verify that an investment professional is licensed, avoid get rich and can't lose schemes, do not invest solely on the endorsement of the celebrity. We have also discussed fraud prevention and red flags of investing, use of social networks for aggressive marketing and unauthorized financial advice, and the growing demand for sustainable finance. And just now, this was a great panel session. And the CFA Institute recently estimated that 69% of retail investors have an interest in the socially responsible investing. So it's an important issue. We strive to deliver an inclusive and open event so that anyone can participate and interact with our speakers, ask questions and receive a response. And the content throughout the events was targeted for both basic as well as sophisticated level of participants. Now, the recordings of all the events are available on AFSA's LinkedIn, as well as the AIFC's Facebook and the YouTube accounts. Over 3,500 participants have attended World Investor Week this year from 20 cities of Kazakhstan and 23 countries of the world. And we think this is a great achievement for us. So now I'd like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to everyone who supported and contributed to the organization of World Investor Week in AFC, including the International Organization of Securities Commission, Financial Planning Standards Board, the United States Securities and Exchanges Commission, CFA Institute, Chartered Institute for Securities and Investments, and many others. On behalf of AFSA, I would also like to thank the AFC family of bodies and organizations who supported the World Investor Week, including the AFC Authority, AFC Court, Astana International Exchange, Bureau for Continued and Professional Development, Green Finance Center, Islamic Finance Hub, Business Connect, and Tech Hub. A special thank you goes out to our AFSA team who have organized this event, to our interpreters, and the technical and media support teams who are sitting just behind the camera. And thank you. Without you, this week wouldn't have been possible. Let me conclude by saying that World Investor Week is one of the key annual events in the AFC, and AFSA is committed to continue promoting protection of rights of investors and consumers. We hope that we have assisted you in understanding some of the key concepts in smart investing. With this, I'd like to announce the 2021 World Investor Week in the AFC closed. Good luck and see you in future events.
Thank you. The World Investor Week is over.